In fact, the last 12 consecutive winners of People's Choice were all Oscar nominated for Best Picture. 3 of them even won Best Picture, which is why the prize ultimately going to The Life of Chuck came as a big surprise to a lot of people this year. The new film from Mike Flanagan, starring a host of interesting actors, including Tom Hiddleston, Mark Hamill, Chiwetel Ejiofor, Karen Gillan, Jacob Tremblay, is adapted from a Stephen King short story. And, despite the involvement of Mike Flanagan and Stephen King, this is more of like a existentialist drama, a bit of like a coming of age story told in different parts. It feels almost anthological. And this movie still has no U.S. distributor. It has no release date. So it's almost hard to...
it got picked up last night, didn't it?
Oh, that would be news to me.
I'm sorry, maybe it didn't. Maybe I just assumed that, okay, no, I might have been making things up. Friendship just got picked up, but
yeah, Friendship
I think Life of Chuck is in I assume it's in a bidding war. I assume for Life of Chuck they're probably bidding behind the scenes.
Yeah, so it's just a rare scenario where this movie, it might not enter the Oscars race just because it might not get released this year. We don't really know what's going to happen to this movie yet. I also feel like despite this being like a good, enjoyable, crowd-pleasing movie, I would be maybe a little bit surprised to see it become like some kind of Oscars juggernaut. Not that there isn't place for movies that can feel good, but I almost feel like it would enter in like a Coda territory where like it's good, but it's not what we necessarily traditionally think of as an Oscars style movie. But just the movie, to talk about the movie itself, this is a really interesting film from Mike Flanagan. As we mentioned, it is this like existentialist drama of sorts that has all these different layers and aspects to the story. Amanda, I know this was one that was high on your anticipated list. What did you think about The Life of Chuck?
I thought it was really good. I'm a big Flanagan fan. Anybody who watches my channel knows that. So I know he can handle emotions really well. Most of his horror still packs an emotional gut punch a lot of the time, which I feel like he's been steering into outside House of Usher, even more so over the years with the last few he had done before House of Usher. So I knew he was going to do this well, and I feel like very few people can toe the line of having this much existential dread being like the beginning of a movie and then still managing to round it out to like the things in life that really matter and still leaving it at this emotional gut punch by the end of it in a way that's really beautiful. I do think that maybe some of the dance sequences go on like a little bit too long, but I can totally get it if you've got somebody who's as talented and willing to do it as Tom Hiddleston. He was dancing up a storm. I like it when the kid's dancing, though. Actually, like when I feel like when he's younger. Yeah, it's like I like the kid. No, it's not at all.
It's not a musical, but there's a lot of dancing in it.
It's kind of like the idea is kind of like the things that make up a life and the things that make a life worth living. And this guy just gets a lot of joy from dancing, and it's just kind of pieces of his life that build into his grandmother teaching him how to, and all the little things. That just, build into, there's things you can be good at, there's things that can matter in the world, and then there's the things that someone can tell you don't matter that are actually the only reasons worth living. So really, really, a lot of tears, a lot of sniffles. I think there's probably some people it's not going to work for in some ways, but I do think that this is going to be one that like on repeat watches is going to hit like even harder. Even when you're watching it, you're kind of piecing together what's happening, and they do a really good job leading the trail into where it's going.
It's a movie that does a lot of like seeding, planting of elements that will then like ultimately have more resonance later. And even when it comes to the dancing, it's this element that surprises you, and then you go further into the story and you realize what an integral part that it is. So there's a lot of really interesting and clever writing when it comes to that aspect. It's also interesting the way that the story sort of just kind of transforms while still being cohesive. Like if it's almost like if you're not paying attention, you'd think it's an anthology, but there is a through line to it. The first sequence in particular was the one that I responded to the most, and it's this big thing that's centered on mostly Chiwetel Ejiofor and Karen Gillan's characters as like the world starts to like fall apart at its seams. And to me, like, even though Flanagan is a director who's made a lot of very scary stuff in his career, this has some of the scariest stuff, and it's not even like traditional horror. It's just the kind of like existential dread that really, really gets under your skin. And part of maybe my more muted reaction to the film is I almost wanted more of just that first section rather than the more like personal coming of age elements that play out later. But it all is really resonant. It does have a lot of the Mike Flanagan style of like monologue writing where the camera slowly pushes in and every word has like has a ton of meaning and moral messaging behind it. But I did still find it really effective. Like, this is one of the films that I think elicited the most like teary responses. Like, people just really felt touched and enriched by it. So, while I said before, I'm not sure if I see this as like a big Oscar player, it might just be one of these films that touches people enough that it could get into some of those conversations. I mean, I wouldn't be entirely surprised to see it crop up in some like adapted screenplay conversations, or even maybe Mark Hamill for supporting actor. But it
took me a while to realize it was him, actually.
Really?
But it is kind of like he disappears into this character in a way. It's not what you expect from Mark Hamill at all. It's like the final scene where, it takes it. They really had to close in on his face for a second to be like, oh my God, that's Mark Hamill. Okay.
How about my boy, Jacob Tremblay?
He's really good. He's in it the least.
Yeah, of all the major names, he probably has the smallest part. It's funny because there's an actor who plays a younger version of him, and I could have sworn that was just Jacob Tremblay. They like filmed it 5 years ago.
Yeah, and he talks in the same way. You know how Jacob Tremblay in interviews is very like mature and sounding like a 50-year-old man sometimes. That's like a well-read 60-year-old in a study is kind of how Jacob Tremblay talks. That's how the younger kid talked too. And I was like, what the hell?
Interesting.
In a good way. You're a little genius. But yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. It's the year of existential dread. TV Glow. Tell me this.
But the way that this does it does it in a way that it starts there and it kind of brings you through it, and it does kind of leave you off with a little bit of it, but it's still trying to leave you off with like hope and a positive emotion, which I like more, kind of the inverted structure.
Yeah, it's certainly a much more optimistic, hopeful film than TV Glow, even if it has some of that like internal dilemma to it as well. So an interesting film to have taken that top prize, and I think a bit of a surprise to some people, although like if you just sort of took the temperature on the ground, it was definitely going to be in the running. People really, really responded to this film.
I thought it was going to win. I was like, I'm pretty sure based on what I'm hearing, because a lot of people were like, Amelia, and I'm like, well, Amelia has the most screenings. But despite it, which is probably fine, I haven't seen it, I don't know. I'm like, I think Life of Chuck is taking it. I think I'm going to put Life of Chuck here. This is one, I was really looking forward to it. I'm a big Mike Flanagan fan, and I know he can handle the emotional gut punches. So when I found out he was making a movie that was Stephen King, but not a horror, I was like, I have faith. It's he can handle it, because the things that kind of set his horror apart is that they do always reach this level of like existential, brutal, emotional horror, as well as like delivering on the scares as well. So I figured that this story in particular that has so much to do with a life and what it means to be alive, and the things that make life worth living, I think he really nailed it. And I like the way that they did it as like an inverted narrative structure as you're building into like what's happening. I know Zach, we talked about it quite a bit in the first episode, but just more that you were more into that first dystopian hellscape horror that the first one was. And I do really like that one. But I love how it kind of comes together at the end, and just him walking into the room. No spoilers as to what it is, but just like it just really starts hitting on the emotional scale of, thinking about the things that do make a life worth living versus like what is valuable to society and like what is valuable to society in a way that people might not initially think is actually considered valuable. And those
in a
are
more
the things,
intangible kind of way.
The intangible things that make life. So I really thought that was really beautiful. It is one of the ones I'm very excited to revisit because of that. So it's in my number 8 spot.
Yes. It's also kind of interesting because I know you're not typically a fan of anthology films, and this is sort of like, it gives you a little bit of that anthology feeling without feeling quite so disconnected and random.
And and that's kind of why I liked Freaky Tales out of Sundance more than I initially thought I was going to. I'm pretty cool with it if everything does feel like it's serving a goal. So I also liked Kinds of Kindness a lot more than other people did. I just felt like there was at least enough of a through line there thematically. I guess it might just depend on the style of anthology, because usually I hear that and I'm out. But this one was very good. It kind of almost feels a little bit like an extended, we've heard this about a couple movies from this TIFF, but like a little bit like, not fully, but like an extended Black Mirror episode where but that's a Black Mirror episode that's more on the side of like a San Junipero versus the horror side of things. It just kind of has that feel where it hits the dread, but then is trying to do something a little bit more wholesome with its ending. So The Life of Chuck.
Life of Chuck, the People's Choice Award winner. Chase, were you surprised when they announced it?
I gotta be honest, I wasn't fully surprised. I texted my sister the morning before or the day of, and she was like, what do you think is gonna win? And I was like, the movie that most people are saying here that they all liked was The Life of Chuck. You know what I mean? I don't know how many people are blown away by it, but I don't see many people really disliking it. I fall in the camp of, when I was watching it, I am definitely a Flanagan fan, like in terms of a lot of his horror stuff. Midnight Mass, I still think is his best thing. Like, I think not enough people talk about it. But good. I wanted to see what he would do differently with this. And even though I wouldn't say it's one of the most well-made movies I do think it's by far one of the best that works, like, emotionally, that you could throw on for the average person. You know, like, not every movie has to be like, that's super artistic.
The Brutalist. Not everything like has to be The Brutalist. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Like, nothing that, sometimes you don't need to dissect something too much. Like, it just has to hit the note home for the average person that watches movies. You know what I mean? And I think if you're looking at it from that lens, Life of Chuck does it really damn good.
Yeah.
I'm with Zach. I think the first third is by far the best third. I'm not as into it later on, but at the same time, with what Amanda was saying, the script does such a good job at calling back certain things from the first act that it makes you go,
it's
okay,
so
well, it is like smartly written. You know what I mean? Like, it's got a lot of good ideas there. And overall, I came out of it saying, I don't know how good of a movie it is, but it definitely made me feel something. You know what I mean? And I think that's why it's a good People's Choice winner. I'm not an Oscar analyst. I'm not one of these people. I don't know.
Either.
I didn't walk out of that movie saying that's a Best Picture contender, but not every movie I enjoy needs to be a Best Picture contender.
Well, that's the thing, right? Because the People's Choice Award winner has this long correlation with the Oscars Best Picture. Like, there's certain things that I think, especially the Oscars prognosticators, really expect from the TIFF People's Choice. But, like, that's not what the award's there for. It's the award for people responding to the movie. And it is a movie that I think really does elicit, like, a really emotional response. I'd find it hard to imagine people sitting through that and not having some kind of reaction to it, even if it isn't necessarily like their favorite. Like, it does kind of pull at the heartstrings and really enrich your soul in a way. So it's not a surprising winner. It's just an unexpected contrast to, like, the Oscar-y type of movies that were expected to win it. Because I still don't think it's necessarily going to be like a big Oscars player. And that's not anything against this movie. Yeah. It's just like, as Amanda mentioned, like, this is not The Brutalist. There's different spectrums to what a good movie can be. And I think people will respond to this as well. So Amanda got Life of Chuck at number 8 on her list.